I just got back from Indian Wells where I watched and talked to Alex Eala. And here are three things I took from that period. Before anything though, note that hindi.
What Alexa did after a brutal defeat, 20 seconds just shattered the internet and left the tennis universe in tears. Welcome back to Champions Tennis, your ultimate destination for the most compelling, pulse-pounding, and jaw-dropping tales from the world of tennis. Today, we are plunging headfirst into a moment that absolutely nobody on this planet anticipated. A moment that was not scripted, not rehearsed, and had completely nothing to do with hoisting a trophy or spraying champagne across a locker room. Yet somehow, inexplicably, it became the single most unforgettable highlight of the entire 2026 BNP Paribas Open at Indian Wells. We have witnessed everything on these courts over the years, haven't we? Racket smashes that send fragments flying, explosive meltdowns that trend on social media for a week, furious, vein-bulging confrontations with umpires that derail careers and ignite international debates. But what 20-year-old Filipino sensation Alexandra Eala did in the immediate aftermath of a crushing, humiliating defeat at one of the most prestigious tennis venues on the planet has shattered the internet into a million fragments, leaving fans, commentators, television, broadcasters, and even rival players completely, utterly, and absolutely speechless. So grab your snacks, get comfortable, and maybe keep some tissues nearby, because this story is going to send shivers cascading down your spine that you will not forget for a very, very long time. Picture the scene, the breathtaking Coachella Valley, where the California desert extends in every direction beneath a sky so blue it almost appears painted. The BNP Paribas Open, held at the Indian Wells Tennis Garden, is one of those tournaments that requires absolutely no introduction. They call it the fifth Grand Slam. And if you have ever been fortunate enough to stand inside Stadium 1 and feel that electric atmosphere surround you like a force field, you understand precisely why this is not merely a tennis tournament. This is a cathedral of the sport. The greatest players in the world treat it like a Grand Slam, prepare for it like a Grand Slam, and the pressure that accompanies competing here is every bit as intense and unforgiving as anything you will encounter at Wimbledon, the US Open, or Roland Garros. For Alex Eala, simply stepping onto that court for the round of 16 was already a seismic, historic landmark accomplishment. Let that sink in for a moment, because context is everything here. The Philippine tennis scene has produced gifted athletes over the decades, but breaking through on the WTA Tour at this level, reaching the second week of what is essentially a fifth major, is the kind of milestone that gets inscribed into national sports history books. She had fought her way through a grueling draw with her blazing forehand, her sharp tactical intelligence, and the kind of mental resilience that most players twice her age are still desperately trying to develop. She was carrying the weight of an entire nation on her 20-year-old shoulders, and not for 1 second did she allow those shoulders to sag beneath that enormous, extraordinary pressure. The anticipation surrounding her presence at Indian Wells this year was absolutely real. The energy building inside that complex every time her name appeared on the order of play was electric in the truest sense of the word. The stadium was filled with devoted Filipino supporters who had driven or flown in from all across California, from Los Angeles, from San Diego, from the Bay Area, and from locations far beyond the state lines. The stands were transformed into a vibrant, pulsating ocean of red, blue, white, and yellow. Philippine flags were visible everywhere you looked, draped over railings, waved through the air, worn as capes, raised high above heads. The roar when Eala walked out to warm up was the kind of noise that raises the hairs on your arms, the kind of noise that signals something truly extraordinary is about to unfold. But professional tennis is a notoriously, almost brutally unforgiving sport. And on this particular afternoon, the fairy tale collided directly and unavoidably with a brick wall. That brick wall had a name: Linda Noskova. The 14th-seeded Czech powerhouse walked onto that court with one singular, crystal-clear mission burning in her eyes, and it was not making friends. Absolute clinical domination was the objective, and from the very first serve she cracked down the center line, it was shockingly, startlingly evident that she was going to execute that objective with ruthless, unapologetic efficiency. Noskova came out firing on every cylinder simultaneously, her ground strokes landing with a terrifying, almost mechanical precision, her serve humming with pace and spin that left Eala scrambling and guessing from the very first exchange. 7 aces, 25 clean uncontested winners, a match that lasted just 55 minutes from first serve to final point. For Alexandra Eala, it was one of those nightmare afternoons that every professional athlete in any sport, in any era, knows and dreads with their entire being. The rhythm simply never arrived. The timing was a fraction of a second off on the big shots. And in a sport where fractions of seconds represent the entire difference between glory and devastation, that margin was catastrophic. The harder she swung, the more the errors accumulated. The more she pushed, the more Noskova pushed back twice as forcefully. No matter how fiercely she battled, no matter how deeply she dug, she was being comprehensively and systematically outplayed by an opponent who was operating on a completely different level of tennis that afternoon. The final scoreline that flashed across the stadium scoreboard was ruthless in its bluntness. 2-6, 0-6. Now, in the cutthroat, often merciless world of professional tennis, a scoreline like that, a double bagel situation on one of the sport's grandest stages, is the kind of result that sends players sprinting for the locker room tunnel. It is the kind of result you want to bury beneath the weight of 1,000 practice sessions, the kind of result you hope the world forgets about by Monday morning. The natural, completely understandable instinct after a loss of that magnitude is to get off the court as swiftly as humanly possible, slam the locker room door behind you, and let the wave of frustration and disappointment crash over you in private, where nobody can witness it. That is what the vast majority of players would do. That is what you would anticipate. But Alexandra Eala is not the vast majority of players. As the umpire's voice echoed across the stadium, calling game, set, and match, the polite, somewhat subdued applause of the crowd rippled through the seats. Eala walked to the net, shook hands with a gracious Noskova, and walked back to her side of the court to collect her racket bag. The cameras were already beginning to pan away, pivoting toward the next story, the next match, the next headline. Spectators were starting to gather their belongings, pulling on jackets, checking their phones, beginning the slow shuffle toward the stadium exits. The afternoon seemed to be drawing to a perfectly ordinary, if slightly anticlimactic, conclusion. And then everything stopped. Because instead of heading for the tunnel that leads back to the locker rooms, instead of slinging her bag over her shoulder and disappearing from view, Eala set the bag down. She paused. She stood completely motionless in the middle of that hard court for a moment that felt stretched across time. And then, she slowly turned her entire body toward the section of the stands where the Filipino fans had gathered. The flags, the colors, her people. The stadium, sensing something indefinably unusual unfolding in real time, began to grow quiet with an almost eerie, instinctive collective understanding that this moment demanded silence and reverence. Without speaking a single word, Eala raised her right hand and pressed it firmly, deliberately, and with total intention over her heart. She looked up into the stands, directly into the faces of the compatriots who had traveled all this distance to cheer for her, who had sung for her and screamed for her, and believed in her with every fiber of their beings. And in the crystal quiet of that desert arena, with the last echo of the final point still faintly hanging in the air, she began to sing. Not a pop song, not a chant, not some crowd-pleasing anthem selected for maximum viral impact. She sang Lupang Hinirang, the Philippine national anthem. There were no booming stadium speakers to support her, no orchestral backing track, no choir behind her, no pyrotechnics or dramatic lighting. There was just one young woman's voice, beginning soft and trembling slightly with the raw, unfiltered emotion of the moment and the physical exhaustion of competition, then growing note by note into something steady and clear and immensely, overwhelmingly proud. For a single suspended heartbeat, the entire arena seemed to freeze solid. Every person inside that stadium held their breath simultaneously, the kind of silence that only occurs when something genuinely extraordinary is taking place, something that cuts through all the noise and chaos of modern life and touches the part of you that still believes in pure, honest human emotion. You could have heard a feather land on the court, and then the magic happened. The moment that broke the internet, the moment that will be replayed for decades. The Filipino supporters in the stands began to join her. It started with just a handful of voices, hesitant at first, almost disbelieving that this was actually happening. Then those few voices drew in more and more. And within seconds, dozens became hundreds, and hundreds of voices were rising together in a soaring, spontaneous, completely unplanned choir that sent shockwaves rolling across the entire Indian Wells complex. Fans who had been halfway to the exits turned around and walked straight back. Grown men who had been wearing their flags like capes stood ramrod straight, hands pressed hard against their hearts. Women were weeping openly, tears streaming down their faces as the ancient, beloved words of their homeland filled a foreign stadium halfway around the world from home. Phones were raised everywhere, hands trembling with emotion, desperate to capture and preserve a scene that every person present instinctively understood they would never witness again in exactly this way for as long as they lived. The significance of that moment, the sheer profound, layered weight of it, struck everyone inside that stadium like an ocean wave nobody saw coming. This was not a victory lap. This was not defiance directed at the tournament, the opponent, or the scoreboard. This was something far more personal far more sacred, and infinitely more powerful than any trophy presentation could ever be. This was a 20-year-old woman in the rawest, most vulnerable moment of her professional life, choosing, without hesitation, to stand on that court and honor the people she plays for. She was telling every Filipino in those stands, and the millions watching through screens back home in Manila and Cebu and Davao, and in every barangay across the archipelago, that she knew they were there with her, that she felt them, that their love and their faith and their pride were not contingent on the scoreboard, and neither was hers. The scene was so extraordinary, so completely beyond anything the tournament staff, officials, or broadcast teams had ever encountered or prepared for, that everyone simply froze in respectful awe. Ball kids stood motionless along the sidelines, wide-eyed and completely still, sensing with a child's honest instinct that something monumental was unfolding right before them. The umpire remained seated in the chair without moving. The court officials did not rush anyone off the surface or attempt to reset for the next match. The cameras, which had been swinging away, now swung urgently back, zooming in on Eala's face, on her hand over her heart, on the tears beginning to streak down the faces of her fans in the stands, as the anthem built toward its final notes, floating out across the dry California desert air. Sports psychologists and performance coaches were subsequently invited onto podcasts and television programs to examine what Eala's post-match response reveals about her character, her mental architecture, and her capacity to process defeat in a way that actually strengthens, rather than damages her competitive foundation. Because here is the thing that the truly perceptive observers recognized immediately. What Eala did in that moment was not weakness disguised as strength. It was not a player drowning her sorrows in a public emotional display to divert attention from a poor result. It was the exact opposite. It was a player so secure in her identity, so deeply rooted in her sense of purpose and belonging, that a 6-0 second set on one of the world's biggest stages could not uproot her. The scoreboard indicated she lost the match. Her entire spirit communicated something entirely different. It said she knows exactly who she is, exactly where she comes from, and exactly why she is doing this. And no opponent, however dominant on a given afternoon, can strip any of that away. That kind of psychological and spiritual grounding is, according to coaches and sports psychologists who study elite athlete performance, one of the single most valuable assets a competitive professional can possess. We have witnessed countless talented players implode under pressure, spiral into career-destroying slumps after a series of difficult losses, or lose their competitive edge entirely because they allowed their identity to become too fused with their results. Win, and you are a hero. Lose, and you are a failure. That is a catastrophically fragile psychological framework that the most elite, enduring champions learn to dismantle. What Eala demonstrated in that Indian Wells moment was that she has already, at just 20 years old, constructed something far more resilient. Her identity is not a trophy. It is her people. It is a flag. It is the words of an anthem she carries in her heart, regardless of what the scoreboard says. Now let us discuss what comes next, because Alexandra Eala's story is very far from finished. In fact, in many ways that resonate on a deep sporting level, this chapter might prove to be one of the most significant ones in the full arc of her career, not because of the loss, not because of the singing, but because of what both moments together reveal about her competitive trajectory and her long-term potential as one of the sport's future superstars. The clay court season is right around the corner. The red dirt swing through Europe, culminating in Roland Garros in Paris, is a completely different challenge from the hard courts of the American West. It rewards patience, physical endurance, heavy topspin, and tactical intelligence in ways that hard court tennis sometimes does not. These are areas where Eala's game has demonstrated enormous aptitude, refined and polished during all those formative years, training on the Mallorcan clay of the Rafa Nadal Academy. The surface transition could suit her beautifully, and after the fire of Indian Wells, you can be absolutely certain she is going to arrive in Europe, hungry, motivated, and with something to prove to herself and to everyone who witnessed that scoreline in the desert. Roland Garros looms on the horizon like a mountain she has been preparing her entire life to climb. Every Wimbledon, every US Open, every Australian Open, and yes, every Indian Wells is a stepping stone, a lesson, a data point in the ongoing education of a player who possesses the talent, the temperament, and now the internationally recognized heart to become a genuine force at the highest levels of the game for many years to come. The losses are part of it. The brutal, public, 5-5-minute losses on the biggest stages are especially part of it. They teach things that comfortable victories simply cannot. They expose the fault lines that need to be reinforced, the weapons that need to be sharpened, and the mental frameworks that need to be stress-tested under real competitive conditions. What transpired at Indian Wells in March of 2026 will be remembered long after the tournament's official champion has been forgotten by the casual observer. Not because defeat is romantic, but because of what Alexandra Eala chose to do with that defeat in the immediate, raw, unfiltered seconds after it happened. She chose to stand tall. She chose to face her people. She chose to sing. And in doing so, she gave every Filipino fan, every young girl or boy in the Philippines who dreams of competing on the world's biggest stages one day, an image of what true courage actually looks like. Not the courage of winning when everything is going your way. The infinitely more rare and infinitely more valuable courage of standing with your head raised and your hand on your heart when absolutely nothing is going your way at all. Alex Eala did not win the BNP Paribas Open this year, but she won something that a trophy cannot measure and a ranking system cannot calculate. She secured a permanent, indelible place in the hearts of millions of people, and she gave her country a moment of pride that will resonate across generations of Philippine tennis history. The clay courts of Europe are beckoning. Roland Garros is waiting. And you had better believe that when Alexandra Eala walks out onto a Grand Slam court the next time, the memory of Indian Wells will not slow her down. It will propel her forward with a force that nothing in the draw can prepare for. This story is just getting started, and we will be right here every single step of the way. All right, Champions Tennis family, that is it for today's deep dive into one of the most emotionally powerful moments in recent tennis history. I genuinely need a moment to compose myself after going through all of that again, because every single time I revisit that footage of Alex standing on the court and singing with her fans, it absolutely overwhelms me in the most beautiful way possible. What did you think? Did watching that clip give you chills? Are you as convinced as we are here at Champions Tennis that we are witnessing the early chapters of something truly historic with Alexandra Eala's career? Share your thoughts, your reactions, and your predictions in the comment section below, because we read every single one, and your voice matters in this community. If this video moved you, if it made you feel something real, if it reminded you of why sport is the most powerful storytelling medium on the planet, then please do us a massive favor and smash that like button right now. It costs you nothing, it takes half a second, and it makes an enormous difference to everything we do here. And if you are somehow still not subscribed to Champions Tennis, what are you possibly waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you are first in line every single time we release the tennis world's most dramatic, most exciting, and most unforgettable stories. We have so much more incredible content coming your way. Until next time, keep loving the game, keep believing in the champions who represent us all, and we will see you in the next video.
Doesn't matter if I win the tournament in Miami or if I lose first round, I know I'm here and I'm here to stay.
So it doesn't matter if I win the tournament in Miami or if I lose in the first round.